Cambridge United managed to stay up last season relatively comfortably in the end, thanks to the work of initially Neil Harris before he left for Millwall in February after a good start to last season under Mark Bonner, and Garry Monk did just enough thanks to that crucial victory at Barnsley with young defender Mamadou Diop coming into the side. But bigger challenges await for the U's as they embrace a incredibly competitive League One that could be brutal next season. So Garry Monk will need to use all his higher league nous to steer the U's to safety. And can they target mere survival this season, or can they target more than mere survival this season, or is that very much the goal? Yeah, we're about to find out whether they can achieve their ambitions this season on this Summer Deep Dive. Yes, welcome along to the latest EFL Debate Summer Deep Dive. We're one of 72 podcasts, club by club, we're doing across the EFL between mid-June and mid-July. The whole lot uploaded for League Two to YouTube and to Spotify, a few for League One as well. So go and check those out once you're done with this one. For now, I'm delighted to be joined by Jack Swindlehurst from the Under The Abbey Stand podcast on Cambridge United. Good afternoon, Jack. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you joining me. Where do you feel Cambridge United are at as a club right now?
I think we're a way off where we need to be to start the season, that's for sure. I think there's a lot of positivity after how the last season ended. You know, staying up was the goal and we stayed up, which is brilliant. And I think there's been a lot of positivity off the pitch about how the club's being run, and, you know, everyone's excited about a new kit we've released. But I think personnel-wise, we're well short of what we need. And I think the size of the task is kind of coming to the fore now. I think this year's League One is going to be a lot harder than last year's. I think there's less basket cases. I think there's better teams with more money. And I think, you know, we need to make quite a few more signings before we're ready to compete in this league.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's been a lot of faith in some of the people at the club, in terms of the sporting director, Ben Strang, in terms of Ian Mather, people like that. I'm just wondering, do you still have that sort of faith in those key stakeholders at the club, behind obviously Barry, who sort of runs it and funds it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a bit of a discourse that's going between the fans and the owners and the people in those high positions. So yeah, I think at some clubs you don't hear much from those people, but I think there is a bit of kind of back and forth. There's a fans parliament that works quite well, and the supporters, you know, kind of alliance, and then there's, you know, the different media outlets, and I think they're pretty kind of open. You know, Paul Barry's brought a couple more investors in as well, and I think, you know, from that side we're quite well run. I think we are one of the teams with the lowest budget, and I wonder how, you know, on the evidence that's gone before, how appetizing a prospect joining Cambridge United is in that respect, because I think we quite often feed on scraps, and I think Ben Strang, you know, gets a lot of flack from fans, you know, for certain recruitment, but I think he's done a good job, you know, and has recruited quite well at times. And I think with the resources they've got, they do quite well. But I think this season will be a make or break one. I think this is the biggest turnover of players going out we've had for quite a while. And whilst we've got youth coming up, I think we really need to recruit to have a chance of staying up. And I think this is going to be a real litmus test for them, because there's positivity about being, you know, becoming an established League One side, and about us, you know, developing the stadium and owning the land that the stadium's on and everything like that. There's loads of positivity off the pitch, but last season the positivity on the pitch and around the management and everything like that, you know, was harder to find. So I think this season is a big one for everyone at the club from the top down.
Yeah, certainly is. Garry Monk then, Jack. A difficult one for me to know quite where to place him in the spectrum of good managers and bad managers, because on the one hand you could look at it and say he was a manager of the year contender in the Premier League in 14-15 with Swansea, where they finished in the top 10 and did the double over Man United and Arsenal, and, you know, talked about as a really exciting young manager. And he's done a really good job, pretty consistent job in the Championship, you could argue, to an extent with Middlesbrough, certainly with Birmingham, certainly with Leeds, even if he didn't necessarily leave either of those clubs in the most harmonious sort of state. But he's done good work in his career in the top two leagues. And yet, since leaving Sheffield Wednesday, in, I think, 2021. He's had 3 years out of the game, and 3 years as a manager, your stock can drop a little bit. So where are Cambridge United fans placing Garry Monk, and what sort of impression has he made on the football club?
I think, that kind of drop in stock is probably evident from him finding himself at Cambridge United after the last few jobs he's had. But I think he's made himself a popular figure. I think he speaks pretty frankly and openly. He was thrust into it when we really needed someone to kind of steady the ship. We were in danger of going into complete freefall when he joined. And he turned things around after a couple of really disastrous results in our season, and ultimately helped us keep up. I think the players respect him. I think in the time that he had without a job, I think he was working on kind of his coaching style, and he was still he didn't have a step back from football completely. He was still doing things kind of in the football realm, which I think helped him kind of develop himself as a manager and find his coaching style a bit more. And this, I think he views this as a project, and I think he speaks pretty, passionately about it. And I know he's also very honest in his interviews, and I think he's done quite well. I also think he'll be a good manager to have to draw players. He's managed some pretty, quite high up players, and as you say, at a high level, and where we are now and where those players will be, they may be kind of in the autumn of their career and taking a step down, and he might be quite a draw for players like that to bring them in and bring them to our club. So I think he's a good manager to have. He seems committed. I mean, we were kind of burnt after having Neil Harris after he came in and spoke quite openly about believing in the ethos of the club, and then turning around suddenly and going to Millwall, just before our big derby. It really it hurt fans. So I think we needed someone like Neil Harris to come like Garry Monk to come in and kind of steady the ship and save it a little bit.
Yeah, well, hopefully Garry Monk can do that. Let's look at the squad then, Jack, and I want to start with the goalkeeping spot. Jack Stevens is what did you make of his form last year, and is he good enough, do you think, to be your starting goalkeeper this season?
That's a difficult one, and obviously you start with a goalkeeper, but I mean, he had a great kind of first half of the season, and he still kind of finished with 9 clean sheets in League One last season, which is a good return. But his season dipped off quickly, and then Will Mannion came in and kind of made the place his own, and has since gone to Charlton. And I think that is a big spot that's questioned. We've only now got 2 keepers. The other one being Louis Chadwick, who's young, and unblooded, really. And I think most people will be under the impression that we need someone else other than Jack Stevens to be our number one. There's some interesting names being floated about, as there always is. But John Ruddy is a former Cambridge United player, and certainly one that could make a return. And a veteran goalkeeper like that would certainly be welcome when you've got a bit of a kind of a quandary with the goalkeeper. And I think Stevens is an able keeper and a good keeper, but he had some difficult times in the second half of the season and was exposed, really. And I think I'd be surprised if Cambridge United, before the season started, didn't sign another goalkeeper, at least for competition for that place.
I really like the idea of John Ruddy. I think the experience that he could bring could be valuable, but there's reports that John Ruddy's got interest from Premier League clubs to be that sort of, the third goalkeeper sort of thing, where they allow other goalkeepers to go out on loan, and they're probably not going to play very much, but they're there just as a sort of backup option. And if John Ruddy was to go to Newcastle, he'd get, I don't know, 40, 50 grand a week. Whereas I'm not sure Cambridge could quite stretch to that sort of salary. It might be a bit of a bit difficult. So that's the sort of challenge that you're up against. But I can see how an experienced goalkeeper would help, because I'm not 100% on Jack Stevens at this level. I guess I wanted to ask you about formation, Jack, because the centrepiece of this for me is Liam Bennett, because I would look at this squad and think you've not got too many big hitters where it's like this player could be one of the best players in the league next season. But I do think that Liam Bennett could be in the right circumstances. And I'm thinking, if you want to maximise Liam Bennett's strengths, I'm thinking a wing-back system is best, because that's when he's delivered his best form for the years, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I think he's still a kind of player finding his best position and still getting used to the men's game. He's still growing, I think, and still certainly going to become a better player. I think also you look at Job as well, who came back from Gateshead, and I think he's someone that you can kind of look at in a three when you've got the two wing backs, and those two coming in together with the experience of Michael Morrison, I think is something that United will be looking at. I think it's so early to judge about how we'll set up formation wise, but I think both of those players are two that, you know, could really kind of develop their careers. I mean, Liam Bennett has established himself this season. You know, he was brilliant at times, and there were other times where, you know, more experienced, stronger players targeted him a bit when it was more of a, you know, a right back role. So I think, yeah, the right wing back role might be more suited. I think our formation and how we set up, as much as they'd like to tailor it to players like that, will depend on who else we bring in. I think we do have if you look at it on paper, we do have the resources to do that formation, you know, but with the likes of Ibson Rossi, who are there, and even Kellen Watts, who we brought in, both have injury form, as do a lot of our squad. So I think we still need to bolster, and depending on who we bring in, you know, defensively, will kind of govern how we set up, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting because although Jubra Locadina is transfer listed, you do have 5 centre-backs on your books. So that would put you, even if there's 4 of them, that would put you in a decent position if you did want to go to a back 3. So that would certainly be worth considering. But the other thing is you've brought in James Gibbons. And the funny thing I think is you've got a right back who's left-footed, and James Gibbons is right-footed, but he can also play at left back. So I'm kind of wondering which way round they're going to operate, Bennett and Gibbons.
Yeah, I think most fans are happy with that. We got to see bits of him last season. He was on loan, and yeah, he's come in and just looks a pretty able player at this level. I think having someone with a bit of versatility and, like you say, can play on the other side with his opposite foot, if you see what I mean, I think is someone quite useful. I think the versatility is a thing for us, and he looked committed as well. You know, he quite often can get loan players who come in and kind of are coasting and picking up a wage and then going back to their parent club when the time comes. But no, he looked like he seemed to care, and I think that's evident in his, you know, the interview that he's given, you know, since joining. It's a 2-year contract as well, so I feel like that's, you know, someone who's looking forward a bit and has a bit of kind of, you know, hope of future with the club. And I think, yeah, I think that all goes down to kind of how the dressing room is. You know, we've had, you know, Barry Corr's been there, you know, since Mark Bonner you left, and there's people behind the scenes who are still there that I think kind of nurture these players and bring them in and probably make it quite like a, you know, a tight dressing room. So yeah, I think having Gibbons there is a really good option to have, and as I say, it'll be good to get both of them firing at the same time. But again, it'll be governed by who we bring in and how Monk decides he wants to set up. You know, it's going to be a difficult season, so it'll be interesting to see.
Certainly will. So talk to me about Zeno Ibson Rossi, Jack, because I spoke to Bournemouth fans about Ibson Rossi, and they were very positive about him. And there was one point where it felt like he could have been getting into their team at either a top-end championship side or possibly even for the Premier League. So clearly this is a defender with huge potential. Has it taken him a bit of time to maybe show that potential at the Abbey?
Yeah, he's not being given much of a chance, in all honesty. You know, there were injuries to him, but also, you know, he was up against Ryan Bennett and Michael Morrison, I think. That was quite hard, and then he wasn't always the next choice after that when either of them dropped out. And obviously Job came back and dropped straight back in and had that performance against Barnsley, you know, and that will live long in the memory. So I think Ibson Rossi has kind of is biding his time and will continue to do so. What I get the impression that he's also really good kind of behind the scenes. He's involved a lot with the community stuff with the club, and I think he's probably quite invested in the idea of how, you know, how the club works, and maybe biding his time. And this might be the season for him where he feels he can, you know, kind of edge his way in, because, you know, there's a bit more, it's a bit more open now. And with Ryan Bennett, there's a big hole left when now he's gone. And it'll be interesting to see, because, yeah, loads of potential, I think. We've never just quite seen him. You know, we've seen a couple of really good performances from him, and then a couple where he's, you know, made a couple of mistakes and gone missing a bit. So I think that's due to the kind of lack of consistency of starting and being involved, but and that'll all be linked to confidence. But certainly be interesting to see if he can get a bit of a run in the team this year. And I feel like he will get a chance at some point this season.
Yeah, that certainly makes sense. Michael Morrison, I think, again, let's take it back to the back three sort of conversation. I think Michael Morrison might suit the middle of a back three, because with that sort of role, you've got defenders either side of him that are taking care of those 1v1 duels, which I think Michael Morrison would probably hate. But I think if you condense his role to just heading balls out of the box and leading the people around him and bringing that organisational nous, I think he can do a job for you.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he's just got that vast Football League experience. You know, he's an incredibly experienced player, someone who's got a cool head, even at his age. And yeah, just seems to kind of be a little bit timeless. He's not slowed down too much, and I think he's so useful to have. And I think when we lose someone like Ryan Bennett, I think keeping someone with the experience of Morrison is brilliant. And like you say, in the middle of a three like that, when we have played that, he can do that quite well. And I think he's just very competent, you know, centre back for this level, and someone that's kind of priceless for a team like Cambridge to have, with a lot of kind of youth coming through. With, if you can have experience kind of spattered throughout the team as well, it's kind of invaluable. So I think Morrison, yeah, will continue to do that job. You know, it'll be interesting to see as a 36-year-old whether we will consistently play him every game or not. And you know, he didn't look off the pace particularly last year, but there were times where he was becoming to be a bit exposed. So it'll be interesting to see if Monk maybe rotates early on in the season, or if he's going to go in with quite a fixed idea of who he wants to start and who he wants to kind of, you know, use from the bench. But Morrison is kind of, yeah, invaluable at this point. And certainly with the lack of numbers in our squad at the moment, you know, he's going to be featuring very heavily, I should think. And yeah, is a kind of leader for the team, and yeah, certainly one that's needed at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. You signed Kellen Watts as well, who has some pretty positive reviews as not necessarily the most progressive defender in the world, but someone who's very competent at the basics. So that centre-back position, for me, I think that's a position of real strength, because you've got Zeno Ibsen-Rossi, who we've talked about has a lot of potential. You've got Morrison with the organisational nous. You've got Kellen Watts, who's very good at the basics. And you've got Mamadou Jabe, who's another really exciting talent. So for me, that looks like the strongest area of the squad.
Yeah, I think actually, you know, I'm berating not having enough depth, but I think the defence is probably where we're all right. You know, Liam Bennett, Danny Andrew in there as well. You know, who both played a lot last season, and I think we are kind of, yeah, we're better there than we are in other places, but it still feels like we're only an injury or two away from it becoming very bare. But I think that's how we've operated in our League One life. I think just the amount of outgoings and because we've only signed Watts, really, you know, from anew, really. So we'd like a couple more signings, but like you say, I think we've got a little bit of depth there where we didn't have it before, and certainly be interested to see if they recruit anyone else in defence. It seems like that's probably the least likely place, but I wouldn't be surprised to see another, maybe, you know, another versatile kind of squad player to come in, but we'll see. But yeah, the defence is certainly on its way to being built.
You mentioned Danny Andrew there. I think it's a given that if you play a back four, he's going to play left back. But not that he'd definitely play, but if he does play, it will be left back. Whereas I think with the back three, I'm not sure he's going to be going to offer quite enough, have the athleticism for a wing back role. So I'm thinking, would he play on the left of a back three, or how would he fit in if he played back three?
Yeah, there's been that conversation. I mean, there are conversations about, yeah, his ability to kind of get up and down. But I mean, he's got great distribution and has shown from dead ball situations he can be very dangerous. Scored a belter with a free kick last year. So I think there is a conversation where Danny Andrew plays on the left hand side of a three if they set up like that. But also, I think, yeah, playing him at left back, and then also there will be a bit of experimenting if that is a three at the back with that kind of wing back position, and it might be that someone else gets brought in to kind of take on that mantle, or it might be that, you know, Danny Andrews kind of thrust into that and maybe forced into trying to change his game a little bit and, you know, adapt a bit. But yeah, he's certainly a really useful player to have, and I imagine he'll feature quite heavily throughout the season. Yeah,
well, yeah, let's hope that's the case. So midfield then, Jack. You mentioned George Thomas starts the season injured, right? I don't know if he's going to be fit at all next season, or if he's going to what the timescale is on his recovery.
I think he is going to be fit in the season for sure, but I wouldn't know whether he's going to be fit at the start. He's pictured back in training, back in with the squad. I'm not going to say he's in training, but he's in the treatment rooms and with the squad who are already back in. So I think we'll hopefully have a bit more of an idea of that as the summer goes on. But someone that we signed knowing he had a history of being injured. When he did play, he really looked like he played at a higher level and had really good games. There was a lack of consistency throughout our squad last year. That was a big problem for us, and I think George Thomas suffered with that as well. And yeah, having a lengthy injury is really difficult, especially when you're a small squad. Can't necessarily afford to carry someone, but yeah, George Thomas is someone that's really good to have and is a cracking player on his day. And if we can get him fit and back in, he can certainly kind of help run that midfield, because it's going to be a really important position. But yeah, I wouldn't say that we've got any kind of confirmation on when we're expecting to see George Thomas.
Yeah, well, that's that could be a big factor that defines a lot of the season, because I was so impressed with him when he was fit last season, and I think his brings a lot to that midfield. So good luck to him, and hopefully he can regain his fitness. But you've got Alfie May, Adam May transfer listed. I know if you signed that Alfie May, you'd be very happy with that, wouldn't you? So Adam May is transfer listed along with Lewis Simper, so it's about whether you find buyers for them. But Jordan Cousins has stayed on, and Paul Digby. So I suppose in terms of fit midfielders to start the season who aren't transfer listed, it's Cousins and Digby. But if they play simultaneously, you don't really get much dynamism there. Cousins is quite tidy. Digby's a very good destroyer. But I think as a partnership, I'm not quite sure whether they give you what you need.
No, you're not alone in that either, Gab. There's plenty of Cambridge fans who are questioning Cousins, staying on for another year. We really didn't get to see enough of him last year. I think there's a few people who are kind of on the pro Cousins side and a lot who are on the fence or on the other side of the fence. It was a difficult watching Jordan Cousins last year, and I think he's got a lot to prove this year. I think he'll want to hit the ground running and prove to the fans that he's worth having. He's chosen to extend for another year. I think he feels like he's got unfinished business, and it's a massive season for him. Obviously this is a position on the pitch where we need to bring people in. There's no question about that. Whether on loan or we're signing players, or even, like you say, those transfer listed players who aren't sold yet. I mean, we're woefully low in this area, kind of, for someone who's fit and can command that. Because Paul Digby, like you say, will break the play up. But even last season, he was my player of the season. The season before, he played basically every minute. He was just Mr. Consistent. And last season, we didn't quite see that from him. There were mistakes coming in.
Why do you think we didn't quite see it? Do you think?
I think we probably lost a little bit of the kind of just a bit of the kind of dynamic manner that we had, and I just think he was under a lot more pressure. He didn't have a consistent partner throughout the season, and I think all of that contributed to probably a lot more of a lack of confidence for him. And I think and I don't think he's getting any younger. I wonder that that there may not be many more League One seasons in his playing career, but we just don't know. But yeah, I think it was a difficult watch, and Digby was by no means the worst player, but just he lost a bit of that consistency from the year before, and it told as the season went on. But yeah, I think he'll feature. If you did a straw poll of Cambridge United fans, I'm not sure how that would look with either of them starting. But we're not spoilt for choice, so I think one or both of them will be starting come the start of the season.
Yeah, so this is kind of how I would look at it from what you've said there, Jack. I think that given how short you are in other areas of the squad, I don't think you should be prioritising your budget on a Paul Digby replacement just because he was inconsistent last year and he might be getting on a bit. I suspect that the club might feel that you've kind of got to rely on Paul Digby getting his form back from last season, and maybe pairing him with a more dynamic partner, someone hopefully a bit like George Thomas who can stay fit. That would be the ideal. And maybe see if you can recruit an understudy to Digby who might be a bit younger but could come in for a few games. But I think you wouldn't really want to put a large portion of your budget into a replacement for Digby who can come in straight away when you've got so many other areas to address.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because we've got, we're light all over, and we're missing much firing power going forward at all, really. But we kind of saw last season how games were lost in that area of the field, you know, getting overrun in midfield. The amount of times we were sitting kind of needlessly deep, inviting pressure on. There were games where we had, you know, spells of possession and then lost the game in that middle of the park. So I think there is a kind of like feeling from United fans that, you know, whether it's budget or not, we still need to get a bit, you know, some more personnel in there to try and bolster that position, because there was a lot of games last year where we had very little possession. There wasn't much inspiring, and it was an attritional, difficult watch. And I think people, you know, a lot of people feel like that was an area of the pitch that we really suffered in last year. And it all leads, you know, it all adds pressure to the defense. You know, it puts those wide players under pressure, you know, and then you know, your keeper's under pressure. So it all feeds back. And I think we just feel like we still need someone else in there. But yeah, like you say, it's by hook or by crook how we get them, really. And I don't think we've got, you know, tons of cash to splash, but there are certainly players in that and then in the forward positions that we definitely need to recruit.
Yeah. Do you think that, coming back to the midfield position, do you think that the deficiencies with May and Simper transfer listed, with probably one of Digby or Cousins starting rather than both, and with George Thomas starting the season injured, means that George Hoddle could actually have a really big pre-season and end up forcing himself into the reckoning? Because he's still young, but you never quite know how quickly he may or may not develop without putting too much pressure on the lad.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. It's an interesting one, because we seem to err on the side of caution when it comes to kind of blooding youth players like that. I mean, Liam Bennett aside, even Liam Bennett, you know, was out on loan at Walsall.
Yeah.
So I think, like, whilst, you know, McConnell is another young one and George Hoddle have both been out, you know, on loan spells, I think they would certainly be kind of more squad players, but that's just what's gone before. Maybe Garry Monk is a bit more kind of progressive in his thinking. And I know George Hoddle has a lot of plaudits at the club who are really excited to see him in the future. And he's certainly there, you know, involved in at the moment. But I'd be surprised if it was thrust upon someone like that. But then again, we haven't started the season with Garry Monk. We need to remember that this is Garry Monk kind of making the role his own, rather than inheriting a load of players and inheriting a situation. He now gets to have a full pre-season with the players and try and, you know, build this squad to be his own and get them to play in the way he wants to. So that's another factor that we need to kind of bear in mind, that he might have a different outlook.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I also think that different outlook could be actually what Cambridge United need to sustain themselves at this level, because as much as having possibly a more experienced core of players in the sort of mid to late 20s is what's had you a really successful era previously under Mark Bonner. I also don't know if that is going to sustain you in League One, where the budgetary gulf is so huge, and you're one of a decreasing number of low budgeted clubs. It used to be 12 a couple of years ago. Now it's more like 6 or 8. You know, the sort of the room for error is getting smaller and smaller. So you've got to try, I think, and actually be brave with youth development and say, we're going to, at least, we're not going to rely on George Hoddle and Glenn McConnell to start every game, of course not. But we are going to try and bring them into the squad and try and develop some of these players and give them a pathway to show what they can do, because that's how we're going to generate saleable assets and actually try and sustain ourselves at this level.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think we have been stung a little bit with losing players like that, because we've been a bit tentative with them and they might have moved down, you know, and we've not quite helped them progress that career, or they've kind of gone on freeze or whatever. So yeah, I think we have been kind of taught that lesson the hard way. But also I think we're seeing teams like Burton, who are obviously, you know, in a lot different position than they were last season, signing a lot of players. You know, it feels like the kind of that, in inverted commas, basket case. There doesn't feel like there's going to be an obvious one or two this season. And I feel like the teams that have come down and the teams that have come up are stronger than in previous years. So I think there's a feeling around the club that we need a bit more thinking outside the box and a bit more proactivity in how we kind of approach this season, because yeah, there's going to be more pressure regardless on our transfer window on everyone. And I think the squad's going to need to stand up and be counted, because last season I think there was a lot of players who kind of squeezed through the season and were carried a little bit and didn't feature so much because they weren't really up to it. So I don't think we can afford that this season. And I think there's probably a focus on that. And I rate Garry Monk to be the man to at least, you know, get us in the position to start this season and then see how he does. I think it's a tough job, and I think you need someone with a bit of experience and, you know, who's been in a higher position and also under pressure in positions. So that's exciting. But I think you're right. I think we're going to need to kind of use what we've already got as well as trying to acquire other players.
I'm looking at the attacking midfield spots, and but you've got Elias Kachunga there, who's under contract for another year, and Sully Kaikai, and they can play a couple of positions. James Brophy has signed up for another year as well. So how are you feeling about those areas? Probably feeling like you need a little bit more.
Yeah, 100%. It's great that Kachunga and Kaikai have recently re-signed. I think it's great to have just players with great experience. Kaikai's been here a couple of times before and seems to really enjoy it. Kachunga's good for, you know, scoring goals. Whilst he might not have, you know, incredible consistency, he really does contribute on the goal front, and that's what we need. But none of these are out-and-out goal scorers. It's been raised a million times, and I don't need to do it again, that James Brophy has a fairly awful return as far as assists and goals. You know, he does bring a lot to the game, and he impresses opposition managers, and, you know, he connects the play really well, and he puts in an absolute shift. But this season, you know, James Brophy, if he's going to feature heavily, needs to add goals and assists to his game, and I think he knows that, and I think the players around him do. I think we're missing a focal point. You know, Fajiri Okunbire's gone, Ghassan Ahadme also. You know, these players were two players who, even though they weren't fit for the majority of the season, you know, basically got us over the line. Ghassan Ahadme especially, you know, scoring massive goals at massive times, and just hitting the ground running after a long injury layoff as well, you know. And it was a shame to see him, you know, likely going to Charlton, I believe, and I think that's almost over the line. And he was just a fantastic player, you know, on the Ipswich books, but someone that we were lucky enough to have. And it was a shame we just couldn't get to see him more. But we need a proper striker, and I don't think we can build our attack around any of those three players really. I think they're great to have as kind of, you know, number 10s or wide players or whatever, but I don't think we should be using them as our kind of, you know, our striking focal point.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You've got Njoku, who's come through the youth setup. Any chance that he comes into the equation to feature a little bit next season?
Yeah, definitely. He came in impressed at the back end of last season, making a couple of appearances off the bench. There's a lot of buzz about him. You know, he really did kind of excite the fans in a point in the season where there wasn't much exciting going on the pitch. It was quite kind of turgid, and he, you know, a quick player, quite tricky, still quite small, but, you know, could really affect a game. And I think, you know, he will certainly feature in some way, and it would be great to see him kind of, get a bit more of a run in the team. And he could really do stuff in League One if he gets, you know, a bit of a consistent run. I think he could be really kind of useful to a team like us. But it will depend on, you know, who comes in. I say we're really low on personnel. If a few were to come in, some of these players we've been talking about, the McConnells, the Hoddles, the Njokus, some of them will go back out on loan. That's just how Cambridge United operate, because we want to get these players playing. And I think sometimes, you know, you can get overweighed in one position, and then they ended up going out for half season and coming back. But you see how that worked with Mamadou Jobe at Gateshead. He had a great season with them, came back, started for us against Barnsley, and, you know, he's really been spoken about for, you know, a starting position next season. So it shows you how little time it can take for someone to get into the team.
Certainly can. So expectations for next season, Jack. Would you say it's to avoid relegation, or would you say it's to avoid a relegation battle?
I mean, in an ideal world, it would be to avoid a relegation battle. But I think if we're being honest, regardless of, you know, with how the team looks now, we need to avoid, you know, a relegation battle. We just need to avoid relegation altogether, because we're not a big enough squad. But I think we've learned a lot in our seasons in League One. I think we've done quite interesting, you know, we've gone quite interesting routes about it. The first season was almost the most convincing, which is bizarre. But I mean, I think we will certainly need to get consistency. We really lack consistency in the whole way through, you know, the last season and the season before. You know, couldn't string a string of results of 5 or even 7 games together, and that's just crucial at this point because it's such a long season. So I think Monk will be really kind of drumming it into the players that consistency is something that they need to do, and it might be a bit more of a kind of even more attritional watch if he gets them playing a certain style of football. But I kind of trust Garry Monk as the person who can do that. And it's, yeah, it's a really interesting prospect. There's still quite a long time before the season starts. You know, the fixtures coming out last week makes everyone feel like it's around the corner, but there's still quite a while before we actually we actually get back on the pitch. So plenty of time to recruit. We've got a fairly normal pre-season as it goes. We've got a training camp in Portugal, but then just normal pre-season games in the UK, kind of close to where we are.
To need the market type stuff, yeah,
exactly. And then you know, want to get to West Brom as well, I think. But yeah, nothing too kind of headline grabbing, but something that'll be really good to get players back on the grass, and a bit of a platform to build on.
Certainly. So if we're saying that the expectation is to avoid relegation, then I'm looking at the squad, and I'm looking, if we're saying, let's put aside the depth and possibility of injuries and things like that, if we're looking at a best 11 that's capable of keeping you up next season, I think you've got, I think Liam Bennett's going to be good enough. I think a few of the centre-backs, definitely Mamadou Diop is going to be good enough. So I'll probably put a couple of stars in for the centre-halves. Then you've got, I think Paul Digby's good enough, and maybe Sully Kai. So that is about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5... about 5 or 6 stars there. So in terms of players who are good enough in terms of the best 11. So are we looking at, do you think 4 or 5 players to come in, or 5 or 6 players to come in that are really improve the best 11?
Yeah, I think probably the 5 or 6 mark, to be honest. I think Kachunga's a good player to have again, but I'm not quite sure how Monk will kind of see him featuring. But I think the 5 or 6 mark, I hope that we kind of, get someone in quite soon. It'd be nice for these players to have, basically a full pre-season with the squad, get to know the people. We've been quite guilty of taking our time in recent times of making signings and late signings, and then only having a couple of weeks with the squad. So I think it'd be quite good to get a core group together. And get out on the training pitch and see how different systems work with different players. And I think we've been, guilty of not letting that happen. So hopefully Garry Monk is the draw that we need, to get that kind of ethos with the team. But yeah, I think we're five or so players off where we need to be, and that's maybe 4 starters and a squad player, but we still need a lot more. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a few that I would say maybe if I was being a bit more generous, someone like a James Gibbons possibly could come in, and then if you play a back 3, maybe I think you've got good enough centre back. So you're not a million miles off, but I think with the goalkeeping situation, certainly the attacking areas, it's important that you take the recruitment seriously. So Jack, just to condense everything we've talked about in this podcast so far, what do you think would be the reasons to believe that Cambridge United can meet their ambitions this season?
I think as I've said, already, we've got a good manager and a good team behind the scenes. It's not just about the manager, and it's not just about the match day staff. I think there's a kind of good core group throughout the whole of everyone there, as we say, quite all the way up to the board and the owners. I think that's important. That's important for players coming in, and also important for players who are already there, and for the youth players. I think we've got that strand of promising youth players to kind of call upon, and a couple of them could have really big seasons and make this an absolute springboard for the rest of their career. So I think there's that to believe in, and I think I also think geographically we're quite well placed, close to London. I think there's quite a few clubs that will have players available that would, it's a very logistical comment, but wouldn't need to move too far to come to Cambridge, and it's quite a nice place to come and live. So I think that's always worth bearing in mind. So I think there's plenty appetising about Cambridge United, even if we are one of the smaller teams in League One and one of the smaller budgets. I think there's a group of players there who showed last season that they've got a bit of determination and a bit of grit as well. When we lost our derby game to Peterborough 5-0, I think a lot of people would have been forgiven for thinking that was us, down and out, relegated and not coming back up from League Two. But the team did what they needed to do, and I think, there's a lot of kind of. We don't want to be the plucky underdogs all the time, but I think there's something to be said for a team that's got a bit of a backbone and can rebuild after something like that. So I think there's plenty to be positive about, cautiously, but we need more people through the door.
Certainly do, and I guess that's the reason that I ask. I ask all my guests reasons for doubt, Jack, and I guess the big one at Cambridge is the first of all how threadbare the squad looks right now. Of course, there's still time to change, but you are going to be returning to pre-season pretty soon. You maybe it's important that you do sort of strengthen, and I guess the doubt would be: are you going to have enough quality coming through the door?
Yeah, it's the $1 million question, really. And we've got a pre-season training tour out in Portugal that's mid-July. So, like by the 14th of July, when that leaves, really by the Friday before, you'd hope that we'd have a couple more people through the door, because you'd want those people to be on that plane and going to that training camp and getting to know the players and developing there, and then coming back and hitting the ground running here. So yeah, I feel like there's major doubt over that. I think we may have been worked out by teams last season to a point, but the good thing about that is we've had so much turnover that it's going to be a very different looking United side going out on the first day of next season. So yeah, I think there are doubts always, and I think one of the big positions is a goalkeeper. I think we need I think we need an experienced goalkeeper at this level to come in and kind of make the position their own. But we'll see if that transpires, or if Jack Stevens is going to make himself a hero next year. But yeah, I think there's plenty of doubt around the Cambridge United fans camp, but plenty of optimism on and off the pitch. And yeah, still got the Euros to get out of the way. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So too early for a prediction because of what we've talked about. The squad is low on numbers, but give me a number between 1 and 10 to denote your level of optimism that your expectations will be realised.
4. And I don't mean that too pessimistically. It's just it's been a tough few years for the club, and the league is getting harder and harder. And I just think we're going to have to pull it out of the bag. But that's one thing that United have done repeatedly since being back in League One. We've pulled it out of the bag when everyone has us pinned to the bottom every pre-season. And that happens. And we kind of I say we don't want to be the plucky underdogs, but that happens, and then we stay up. So it's something that we've become accustomed to, and I guess that's how we operate at this level. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I'm excited, but yeah, I'm cautiously negative, I guess.
New phrase coming up on EFL Debate. Listen, thank you so much, Jack, for your insight. Really appreciate your time joining us from the excellent Under the Abbey Stand podcast on Cambridge United. Make sure you get subscribed to them. Get yourself subscribed to EFL Debate on YouTube and on Spotify. And we'll see you again with another summer deep dive very soon.